I'm delighted to welcome a panel discussion from our organization, Talent 2025. Talent 2025 brings together 100 plus CEOs, and their goal is to create an integrated talent system to meet the needs of West Michigan's employers. Talent 2025 illuminates gaps, evaluates leading practices, and advocates for the implementation of these leading practices to make West Michigan a top 20 employment region by the year 2025. To my immediate right is Kevin Stotts. Kevin Stotts joined Talent 2025 as president in July 2011. He has the unique responsibility of leading an organization of 100 plus CEOs. Before joining Talent 2025, he served as vice president of community programs with the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce for 8 years, where he directed the Center for Community Leadership and launched HelloWestMichigan.com. On my far right is Sean Welsh. Sean is the regional president of West Michigan for PNC Bank. In this, he has responsibility for 41 counties in West Michigan, from Kalamazoo to Traverse City. In this, he oversees PNC's business strategy and community investments within the Western Michigan market. His is now a 25-year career in the banking business. He served as co-chair of the Talent 2025 Board of Directors and also chairs its Early Childhood Development Working Group. Like everyone here, he's actively engaged in board service. In the center is Mike Jandernoa. Mike joined Perigo in 1979. He served as president and CEO of Perigo from 1983 to 2000, and he continued on their board until 2016. And Mike, I think it's easy to suggest that yours was a legendary career at Perigo. When he joined the company, they had about 300 employees. They were one of 40 suppliers. And when he grew that to a company of 8,000 employees and became the nation's largest manufacturer and marketer of store brand over-the-counter drug and nutritional products. He's an active entrepreneur, co-founding and serving on the Grand Angels and Bridge Street Capital Partners, and he actively mentors entrepreneurs. He and his wife, Sue, have a strong interest in education, especially in elementary mathematics. Please welcome this panel from Talent 2025.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be with all of you this afternoon. David, Dr. Pink, both members of Talent 2025. David was one of the founding members of our CEO Council and has been just a great partner in our work at Talent 2025. And it's a pleasure to be with you and just appreciate his leadership. As David said, Talent 2025 is a coalition of over 125 CEOs from across West Michigan, came together in 2011 to really look at, how do we improve the quality of talent attraction, retention, development across the region. So by region, I mean 13 counties of the western side of Michigan, which is sort of the labor shed, encompassing about 1.7 million people, almost 900,000 people in the workforce today. And we believe that geographic unit is sort of the best unit by which to look at talent issues, because it encompasses the workforce boards, the higher education institutions, the K-12 districts and early childhood providers, and then thousands of employers in different industries, et cetera. And we started that work really in response to coming out of the Great Recession, when employers were beginning to hire. And at that time, there was a disconnect between who employers were looking for in terms of the knowledge and skills they required, and who was available and left in who was looking for work. And at that time, there was probably 7 or 8% unemployment. So you would think that talent would be plentiful. But even then, coming out of the Great Recession, employers were really looking for and identifying that there was a skills gap. So this group came together. I think Mike and Sean were a part of that early conversation. And they looked at the problem and had done some research and had said, hey, how do we go about this? And there was a recognition that there was maybe a different method was necessary, that these gaps had existed before. And so this organization around CEO-led organization, really wanting to engage with the education workforce leaders, was kind of formed. And so as David introduced Sean and Mike, both of which have been really key leaders within our membership structure. We have a CEO council, 125 members. We have a board, and then we have working groups. And those working groups are sort of focused on the different segments of the talent system: early childhood, K-12, higher ed, workforce development, entrepreneurship, and so much more. Sean and Mike, maybe love to hear from your perspective how you came into the organization, why you joined and got involved, and a bit about where specifically each of you have been involved in the Work of Talent 2025. So Mike, can I start with you?
Sure. Welcome everybody to West Michigan. We all think this is a very special and a unique place, and not just in the country, but in the world. So we're proud to live here, and I'm proud to work together to continue that legacy and make it better. So Fred Keller, who had this idea, Talent 2025, came to me and talked about this idea. We had 1 million people leave the state of Michigan, and we went from 11 million to 10 million population. And he said, we've got to do things different. And the business community has to get involved and has to be working with others. And we need the right policies to change this dynamic. And as Kevin was saying, bring more talent to the community and start growing the community again. And through that effort, he set this goal of having 60% of the workforce have at least a community college degree or 4-year degree, so that we'd have a skilled workforce and a workforce that could fill many of these jobs that were open. And so it was one of those opportunities, and we started very early on with, I think we had 35 in the first group, and it built, like Kevin has said, to 125 CEOs that commit time, not to just participate on the council or on the board, but participate on working committees. And I think that's been the secret to our success, is the involvement of these leaders to get directly involved. And we're blessed to have a staff. Kevin and his staff do an incredible amount of work. It's very, very easy over here in West Michigan to herd 125 CEOs. Maybe where you come from, that may not be so easy, but it's a very easy job, I think.
Yeah.
Got to be simple. Yeah, thanks, Mike. And I'm laughing at myself because I'm fortunate my office is across the street, and I pulled up my computer to click on the Zoom link, and I'm like, ooh, this is in person. So that's why you saw me running in the side door here. It wouldn't be the first time I walked into a room of educators late for something. But yeah, the Talent 2025 is a very unique organization. It's interesting because we say something that I don't think I necessarily agree with, which I think is our secret sauce. We say it's a CEO-led organization. I would tell you it's a CEO-convened organization, because whenever we get into our working groups, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at all of them, from K-12, early childhood, higher ed, returning citizens. We've had entrepreneurships. We have diversity and inclusion. Every one of them, we put together groups of people that really know the subject way better than Mike and I do. And we just show up thinking that we know something, and we find out when we get there that we don't. But we learn and we listen. And if you look at all the working groups as they've evolved over our 10 plus years, it convenes with educators, parents, funders, governmental officials. The CEOs really just, I think we could say this about all the groups, why we've been effective, is we learned so much that we didn't know. But the one thing that we are able to do is we're able to call people and advocate. And when we go forward and we advocate and we say our group, which includes parents, teachers, funders, the whole circle of people who are involved in all these issues, agree on this thing, whatever that thing is, and we'll talk about some of that. That's, I think, really the secret sauce of why we got stuff done. We don't show up with a solution. We show up with an open ear and figure out, how do we get this stuff done?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Kind of building on that, Sean, we don't do programs. Our work is really kind of a process of illuminating the facts and with data, evaluating solutions and that advocacy. Both of you have chaired or and are chairing working groups or are now involved in other working groups. Can you talk about that process and how it works from the position where you sit, leading and being a part of working groups today? Sean?
Yeah, I'll give the example I always give, and it's not a working group that I was involved in, but I think it probably resonates with some people in the room. And I believe David was actually at this meeting. I don't know how long ago, but our two CEOs who chaired the higher ed group, I believe it was the CEO of Amway and it was the CEO, I think it was of Hayworth.
Herman Miller, yeah.
Or Herman Miller, yes, thank you. Two large employers in the community invited all the college presidents, community college presidents to a meeting. And, most of these individuals felt like they probably should go given who was inviting them. And I've talked to a couple of them who were at the meeting and they thought, okay, I'm going to a meeting. I'm being invited by two CEOs who are very influential in the community. And they're probably going to tell me what I'm doing wrong. And they're going to tell me how, this is such a simple issue that, that we can figure this out for you if you just listen to us. And that's not the meeting that these two CEOs ran. They got in there and they basically said, we have a talent need. We're consumers. We will hire every student you have if we can work to get these skill sets. How do we work together to make sure every kid graduates from your organization, institution, and gets that job that they can fulfill their potential in life? And it became a meeting where they started with a common goal. I think all too often our meetings start with, here's what I think we should be doing, which, degrades from there. And I think all of our working groups learned a lesson from that first one. At least I did. I know in the early childhood group of, show up to listen and show up to learn, and then quickly figure out what we all agree on. And we can get so much done if we start with that.
Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, my first group was the entrepreneurial group. And one of the things that we realized in our entrepreneurial activities is that we had very little startup business going on and not a lot of investing or organizations that were getting off the ground. So we were probably ranked at 48, 49th, or 50th as a state in entrepreneurship. So we knew we were starting from the bottom. And so we decided as a group, first thing we needed to do was go look around the country, see what other states were doing or what other regions were doing and where they were doing it well, and look for best practices. So we had three areas around the country that we thought looked terrific. We sent a couple of staff people out to check two of them out, and they got some good feedback. And then we looked at it again and we thought, well, this third site out in San Diego, California looked to be the best in class and could have some similar attributes that might fit well here in West Michigan, pharmaceutical and technical backgrounds and research backgrounds. So we decided that we needed to go out there. Well, again, the CEO base, go learn from the practical application. We took 5 of us went out there, including a president of one of our key universities, Ferris State, Dave Eisner. Not picking up, but we went out, spent the time out there, got to see what they were doing. And we learned so much that we created the interest and excitement to change what we were doing here and look at how we were collaborating to Sean's point that we don't have all the answers in business. And in particularly in entrepreneurship, we better be working with the academic community, and we better be working with the governmental community, and we better be working with the business community. And we found some really good ways to connect those dots in a way that can make progress. So the beauty of that is that bringing that back and making that change and working together, we've changed from being on the bottom of those lists to up in the mid-20s, especially for new startups and fundraising. So made a lot of progress. We're not a long way away from a top 10 state, but we've made significant progress such that we no longer have that committee anymore. We've got an organization that runs through Start Garden that takes that responsibility and builds from there. So those are committees assignments that I like to be on. Get on the committee and eliminate the committee.
Yeah. Well, but if you're so effective, you just get tapped for another committee. So,
You shouldn't have, that should have been a foul on you.
Yeah,
For asking.
so, it's, the work that we do is, illuminate, evaluate, advocate. So we talk about being an accountability partner and advocate to the system. So the intent is not to do the work, is to really sort of block and tackle for the leaders in the space, be it early childhood, K through 12, or workforce development, and help everyone improve. Because when the system from early childhood workforce is improving and high performing, that results in employers succeeding, getting the talent or having the support for their employees with issues like childcare, et cetera. And it's that co-defining. So it's not coming with a set game plan or solution. It's sort of that co-definition of the problem through dialogue. And I would say that what our business leaders do in that exchange is they're able to keep everybody at the table. I think that's really kind of a unique attribute. We have had working groups now since the founding of the organization that still exist today. And a lot of times you see that energy with any sort of community effort kind of dissipate over time. But our groups are kind of still at it. One's going through a reinvention right now. Sean, can you talk about your group specifically, the early childhood working group? I think it has a couple of really good examples, preschool and childcare, where the process kind of lived out to have some pretty big outcomes.
Yeah. We had some early wins, and one that I'll pick out is, we went to the state of Michigan asking for funding to fund pre-K, early as 4 and 5-year-old slots to allow kids to be prepared when they show up at school. Because it's difficult, as you all know, and I learned. If a child shows up at first grade, kindergarten, they're all at different levels. They're all at different stages of learning. And that teacher has to deal with all those kids. And some kids are left behind, not through the fault of the teacher, just because of the preparation and the family challenges. So we went to our state as a group, as a business community. And prior to that, we learned from the education community and the parents the value of this. And then we worked to get the data. Because we got $65 million in funding, which was great. Talent 2025 kind of led that. Part of the reason we were successful is once we did the work and understanding it, we then reached out to our peers throughout the state in Detroit and Lansing and Saginaw and Traverse City and said, come along with us. So when we go to Lansing, we're all saying similar message. We all have data that backs it up. Because if you're the legislatures all want to do the right thing also. I mean, that's everyone, there's no one in this whole puzzle of complexity that's saying, hey, I'm just going to do the wrong thing today. A lot of it is they're looking at it without all the information. So coming forward and being able to present the information and the opinions of a wide circle of stakeholders and a wide geography of the state made it easier for our legislatures to say, okay, that I can support, because I can see there's constituents all across from all angles that are wanting to do that. And that's been a real lift for us as we've gone forward. There's been other things that we're still working on. We try to be data-based. We try to make sure that, we're listening to the teachers. We're listening to the parents. The group that I chair with early childhood, we meet quarterly, and there's probably, 20, 25 of us to get together. And it's everything from the mom from the poor neighborhood saying, hey, this is the reality that I deal with every day, to the teacher, to the administrator. In that particular group, the business, my 2 other CEOs that are on that group with me, we're not hiring kindergartners, although some of our clients may think we are, but we're not hiring kindergartners. We're trying to invest to make sure when they come out of the end of their education, that they have the chance to reach their full potential. I mean, it's a long game that you play, and you got to start that game somewhere.
Can I add a comment to that? It seems like that early childhood and $65 million would have been easy, but my wife was a 30-year school teacher, had served on a committee with a couple other business leaders and a number of other school administrators and other teachers. And for 10 years, tried to get that funding and never got there. But when Sean and his group in Talent 2025 worked with those same groups plus other business groups around the state. We got it done finally, but after all these years. So the collaboration that goes not only inside our organization and the community we work on, but we have through Kevin and others that work with other business groups across the state, whether it's the Business Leaders of Michigan at times or the Grand Rapids Chamber or the Detroit Chamber, to get change that will affect the entire state, because we can't do it just from a West Michigan landscape. We need partners around the rest of the state. But with the research and the facts and the data and the community input, we can make really good things happen together.
Yeah, and I just kind of build on that. I would say that that's through the data and the research and the convening, that we're able to crystallize a problem sometimes for a broad group of leaders, that so they can kind of get it. Like early childhood, people would not have thought that investment in early childhood was all that significant or necessary for the business community to get behind. But when you look at investment in early childhood leads to the biggest return on investment in terms of educational dollar, and that kids entering kindergarten more likely to be reading by third grade, or likely to be graduate from high school, college, and career ready, et cetera. It's a really simple proposition and a really simple argument to get people behind that. Sean and Mike, talk about circumstances, kind of the when sort of our model, CEOs convening leaders, when it works, what are the ingredients of making that work? And maybe times when it's more challenged.
Well, it works when we have partners and other individuals and organizations that we're working with that want to be engaged and want to look at changing and being part of a new solution. We, as Sean mentioned, we try to come in to understand what the facts are. Where are we? And then where are other states, where are other communities that are in better shape, and look at the facts first, and then start talking about solutions. And if the partners are willing to do that, we're pretty good at coming up with solutions. I'd probably say the most frustrating area that we've had has been in K-12 education, where it's just not in our state. We have so many school districts. We got 560 public school districts, 300 charter school districts, and it's very decentralized. We got intermediate school districts. So it's hard to get the consistent feedback from that group to get behind an answer and a solution. So where we can see some opportunities and look at other states and what other states have done, it's a little more difficult when that group doesn't have a leadership and a structure that can represent them consistently and effectively, that it makes it very difficult. So I'm disappointed in our lack of progress there. Significantly more progress in working with higher education, the community college and the four-year schools, but we've struggled a lot at the K-12 side.
Yeah, Sean, different landscape in early childhood. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, the early childhood, all phases along the journey of education is complex. I've learned that. The early childhood one, we stood up early, and it's a smaller part of the journey. So we're dealing with just several years with these children. But we were successful in convening people around, and I said this in the beginning, convening people around the common goals. And sometimes you had to remind them of the common goals and kind of re-educate ourselves on what it is. I mean, I can remember early on giving a talk in front of a group of state legislatures about the value of funding this. And I think it was back even before we got this, it was before we got the $65 million. And one person asked me, and it was not a malicious question, it was just a naive question. They said, well, why do we throw all that money in there? We can't solve family problems. And I'm just like, okay, they're not quite, we haven't gotten everyone aware of the situation. The reality is, and we believe this at Talent 2025, and I believe this personally, every child is born with the same potential to succeed. And then the world puts obstacles in front of them. And if we can find a way to get those obstacles out of the way, we, as a society, it saves us so much money. It saves us, it creates so much wealth. I think when you're doing hard things, you have to say, I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, for sure. But then you also have to build a business case around it. So it's sustainable and it happens every year. And I think you're all smart educators. We all know that if every kid arrives at kindergarten at the same correct stage to learn, our cost of education goes down. We saw this, we studied something in the Granite City School District, which is in Salt Lake City. And I can't remember if there's anyone here from Utah, but Salt Lake City, they did a social impact bond where they funded through private donations. It was through the Pritzker Foundation and the Goldman Sachs Foundation, where they funded pre-K school. And it's what they found was the kids were arriving at kindergarten ready to learn. And the teachers, there was less kids that were being designated special need or special education. I'm probably using the term wrong, but special education. And because of that, the cost for educating went down, the outcomes went up, and they're still studying that, that group of kids as they go forward. But I think we're going to end up with kids that are better educated, reach their full potential, and we save the taxpayers money. And the state of Utah, last time I looked, although it's still a little early, but the state of Utah is one of the bright spots in economic development in our country right now. And I don't know if I directly go back to that because that's only been around for about 10 years now. So those kids are 13 or something right now. But they're doing that kind of stuff that really makes an impact and builds the business case.
And the bank is doing its own social impact bond in early childhood as the bank or the foundation, correct?
We are, yeah. We did the first, and to my knowledge, the only social impact bond in the state of Michigan. We did ours, it was a little different, but we did it for prenatal and postnatal care. And it's what we found. There was a study probably, 12, 15 years ago in Kent County, where we looked at the infant mortality rate in Kent County, which is the county we sit in. And when you looked amongst the African-American community, we looked like a third world country. And we said, we got to get after this. We got to make a difference. And that made a difference. And then later was when he was a governor here, put forth asking if people would privately fund a program to take this to scale throughout the region. And ourselves and the Kellogg Foundation, we put about $1.6 million into it. The Kellogg Foundation put, they got money coming out of their ears. They had all kinds of money they put into that thing. But what we're finding is we've bent the curve. And so, educational capacity starts, the day you're born, through nutrition, through healthcare, through all those things. So we invested, I don't know if that's early childhood, that's like early childhood, but we were way up the curve on that one.
It counts somewhere. And I think that's a really important point too, is that it's not just, changing public policy in the state capital, Lansing, or getting sort of appropriations from the legislature and signed and sort of enacted by the governor. It's also programmatic, identifying what we describe as sort of leading practices, be it social impact bonds in this example. We have an initiative also in early childhood that takes leverages family practitioners and pediatricians to sort of use books as a tool to assess sort of the well-being of a child and talk to the parents or caregivers about the value of reading. It's a national best practice. It started in one community here. It's now being replicated or scaled across the region. We're doing something similar in K-12 education, taking career education and a model that's in one community, and we're scaling it. And we've also had in K-12 education an emphasis on early literacy and some best practices there. And all of the K-12 educators pre-COVID came together back in 2017 to really focus on implementing these best practices around early literacy. So we have a big focus on reading by third grade in the state of Michigan. That was directly sort of pointed at that statewide goal and a stated goal of Talent 2025. So sometimes it's not just policy, but it's also showing what works and getting sort of buy-in to scale and replicate that work. And I think we've got about 10 or 15 minutes for questions. So I'll pause right here to see if there's questions. Yes.
I applaud your efforts, but I also would like to hear you address the employment benefits that you give to your employees, in particular, like tuition reimbursement programs and other things that address some of the efforts in higher education, since you're all CEOs and employ a lot of people. That those are important ingredients on building and retaining your workforce.
Especially if you're growing your business. And we had the number of years where we're growing at 30, 35, and 40%. We had a lot of tuition reimbursement because if our workforce wasn't growing in their education, we couldn't grow from a $30 million company to a $2 billion company when I was still CEO. You can't do that without a better educated workforce. So we had to use education and masters and other degrees for the senior executives. And then we had to do, beginning community college education and or four-year education for all the workforce and for their families. So that is something that we've supported at Perigo, but many of our businesses have that same kind of commitment to their employees, and maybe not as many to their kids as well, but most do, in terms of trying to make sure that their families are thinking and planning along, especially those families who have not had anybody go to a higher education institution. So.
Yeah, I mean, same as Mike. We do tuition reimbursement. We encourage our employees to go back. The other thing I'd comment on is that the educational and resource needs of our employees have just changed drastically through COVID, and that's something that we're really focusing on. Also, if you look to see the impact on females for returning to work in COVID, the women in the workforce have been hit the hardest. And it's because of childcare, it's because, of family care, it's all the issues that, it just kind of blew up in COVID, and the childcare system is kind of, I don't want to say falling apart, but it's been injured a little bit through this whole thing. So we find ourselves as an employer, and we employ about 5,000 people in the state of Michigan. We find ourselves having to step in. We now have services for our employees. If they wake up in the morning and their childcare provider isn't there, they can call, I'm going to call it a crisis line, but they can call this number and we can help them get the childcare they need. I found myself, I guess it was actually before COVID, but working with the county transportation department in Kalamazoo, because we have a big operations center there, saying, I knew where our employees were coming from, and I knew where our facility was, and it was a long way. And I talked to our managers, and we had a high turnover rate. And I said, well, we need to ask our employees why they're leaving. Why can't we keep these people? They're great people. And a lot of it was transportation. So we actually went to the county Department of Transit and said, we will subsidize that bus route to make it from that point to that point. Because we ended up we saved money by lowering turnover, and it was the right thing to do for our employees. So I think you'll find employers have really gotten an education, and I don't think it's over because of COVID. I think as we start going back, hopefully more towards a different work environment, or back more towards what it used to be. I don't think it'll ever be back to where it was before, but employers are going to be finding themselves in much different discussions on how to attract and retain talent in their workplace. And we talk about that a lot at Talent 2025.
Yeah, and I can see it's sort of a mindset shift. It was right before COVID, but it's really accelerated since, is employers really understanding sort of the education skill level of their workforce, because they can't find talent. So it's like, I've got to develop who I have. But I think pre-COVID and pre this sort of talent crisis we're in right now, it was just kind of focusing on those individuals with a high school diploma or maybe some college, and how do we help that group? Now you have employers, many offering adult basic education courses. If for some reason a group of their employees does not have a high school diploma. I was shocked a while ago, just right before COVID, and I asked a question amongst the board, how many of our board members alone were offering adult basic education programs. So it's part of the strategy we have around engaging employers and saying, you got to be really an active part of the solution. So it's employee brand, retaining your talent, hire people for attitude, develop them with upskilling, and doing other things to sort of be an active sort of investor in sort of the talent system, not just being a passive sort of consumer and letting that talent come through the door. So great question. Another question, maybe a question online.
Maybe I'd add a touch while I'm looking for the next question. I think it's going to be incumbent upon higher education and the business community to come up with some new models, because the shortage of workers is so extensive. And especially in a state like Michigan, we've got a lot of baby boomers and don't have enough students to replace them. The pure math doesn't work. And we have so many not well-educated adults or soon-to-be adults that we need to figure out a path for those individuals to get started in a career. And maybe it's going to be through certificates or through other apprenticeship type programs, but that I think are going to need to be offered to these adults who are in a job working full-time to get some additional academic knowledge and understanding to do a better job. So where a job in the past has required a 4-year degree, we're going to have to hire people without a 4-year degree and help them learn on the job, but learn also with additional individual classes, maybe not full masters, maybe not full education. So I do believe that the world has changed with COVID and with the needs of the workforce and an aging workforce, that we're going to have to replace that aging workforce with a different workforce as we go forward.
Yes, over here.
Do you have any challenges working as a statewide organization and communicating across the state? You mentioned the number of school districts, but also I'm assuming a number of employers and businesses.
Well, we focus on the 13 counties of West Michigan, the labor market, but we have really good partnerships with the different business groups around the state, which we often sort of band together to sort of have a common voice in issues on K-12, which we've got a big effort on K-12 right now, or early childhood or workforce development. And that's how we've been able to leverage it. So I think our credibility, our data-driven, research-driven approach, I think, is easy for some of those organizations to jump onto. And we oftentimes will sort of jump onto some of the efforts that they're trying to lead to sort of improve the sort of the talent development and attraction efforts in the region. So we're not statewide, but we have, I think, a good presence and sort of working relationship with many across the state.
Clearly better though with the business community. And I'd give Kevin and his team great credit. Then the business community, Grand Rapids Chamber, Detroit Chamber, BLM, Small Business Association, they work incredibly well together. Not as good with the education, the unions and the superintendents, not so good, but other groups, we continue to work on more, but I think there's still an opportunity to be better at that outside of the business area.
Thanks so much for sharing today. This is really incredible. You've talked the way that the business community has come together and the need for the education community to come together. What about that third part? What's the attitude toward more education or higher education? We're noticing throughout the country that the number of men attending colleges is really, really going down. So talk about the culture, especially here in Michigan, which would probably apply to everybody in the Midwest, about men going back to school and getting more education.
Yeah, it's maybe this is not my area of expertise, but I'll answer you. But I learn as I listen to these different groups, the common theme, and we've all talked about it, when I went to school, when I went to high school, if I didn't go to college, my mom and dad would have been devastated. That's not the right answer anymore. And I think we're slowly, kind of getting our heads around that. And we're all from Midwest states, so we have incredibly high paying advanced manufacturing jobs. The other thing we had when I was in high school was, we used to call it shop class. That's probably not the right word. But we taught those trades, we taught those skills, and those people went on to great jobs, great lives, and they fulfilled, great needs within our community. I'd like to think that we're kind of coming back around that curve. I mean, I know when I go to visit any of the bank clients and I go into some of these advanced manufacturing facilities, they're complex.
Yeah.
I mean, and they're clean. It's data-based, it's computers, it's high advanced manufacturing. I think we're putting the glamour back onto that.
Yeah.
Which, for lack of a better word, if you had a high school party and you told everyone that you weren't going to college, you probably wouldn't have had a high school graduation party. And I think we're starting to change that conversation. And that happens through a lot of groups throughout West Michigan. We have a manufacturers association that runs, and they're really educating the kids. They bring the high school kids in to these manufacturing facilities, and the kids are amazed. So I don't know. I'm not an expert on the
I'd say,
topic,
just say real quick, figuring that out, because it's the decline in enrollment, it's the decline in labor force participation. I think Sean's right. We haven't done enough for males to show them pathways, and they're hearing that about the high cost of education. And we've taken out shop classes from the high school. So efforts like that and being more focused and doing more within the high school environment, having more career pathways and talking about the economic opportunity by starting in a trade or maybe with a certificate and moving forward. If you can solve for one, I think you can solve for the other issue, the workforce issue. But it's a serious crisis that's unique to the United States. Western countries don't have the same sort of challenge. Yeah. So.
I'm really reluctant to cut this off because I wish that we could hear another hour of your comments. Talent 2025 began to increase educational attainment in our area, to create a better standard of life in West Michigan, and then to create more jobs. I think the reason I wanted you to hear this is because this regional effort is really extraordinary, and the weight and the scope of it is exceptional. But I think you also heard the humanity behind what this organization is trying to do. Would you thank our panel for me?